The 1930s were a period of intense artistic experimentation as new forms and methods were explored, transformative cultural institutions were found, and artists self consciously sought to reach broader layers of the public. However, before getting to the heart of the matter, I would like to have a quick glance at the historical context in order to get an overview of what was really going on during those years. The 30s saw the growth of shanty towns caused by the Great Depression. That was the most relevant worldwide economic downturn that began with the Wall Street crash in 1929. As a result, the number of unemployment and poverty increased significantly. What is more, America and Canada suffered the consequences of dust storms, causing major ecological and agricultural damage to their lands. The decade also saw authoritarian regimes emerge in countries across Europe and South America. Regarding Spain, we suffered a terrible civil war. In this depressive context flourished the most beautiful art. To start with, we will focus on literature, where we can find writers like Fitzgerald, Tolkien, Hemingway, Alejo Carpenter, Pablo Neruda, Alfonsina Storni, Miguel Hernández, among many others. Thanks to these great writings, we could travel around the world and even time travel. Such is the case with Huxley's novel Brave New World, published in 1932, in which we, readers, could be part of a futuristic world state based in social hierarchy. Another relevant writer from this period is Miguel de Unamuno, a Basque ensayist, novel, poet, playwright, philosopher, professor of Greek and Classic, and later rector at the University of Salamanca in Spain. We all remember this quote: "You will win because you have enough brute force, but you will not convince. In order to convince, it is necessary to persuade, and in order to persuade, you will need something that you lack: reason and right in the struggle." I see it is useless to ask you to think of Spain. I have spoken. If you want to learn more, there's a great biopic called Mientras dure la guerra, in English, While at War, directed by Alejandro Amenábar. The plot revolves around Unamuno's life and how he faced himself and his ideals during the Spanish Civil War. I cannot help but finish this section with one of the most relevant Spanish writers. Yes, I'm talking about Federico Garcia Lorca. Among his work, we find, for instance, Poet in New York, which may well be one of the greatest books of poems ever written about New York City. As for films, the Depression era audiences escaped into a world of glamour, fantasy, and monsters in a decade that ushered in Hollywood's golden age. The 30s was the decade of sound and color revolutions and the advance of the talkies, and the further development of film genres. When assessing those years, the word iconic is liable to be overused. There were iconic comedies, dramas, westerns, animation films included titles as Modern Times, The Little Princess, The Wizard of Oz, or Gone with the Wind. However, it is necessary to highlight two genres. On the one hand, war films. It can be said that this specific genre flourished due to its historical context. Remember that we are talking about the interwar period. Hell's Angels is one of the most relevant examples of this type of genre directed by Howard Hughes. The film is well known because of its high cost direction, production cost of about $3 million. I recommend another great film called The Aviator to understand more the director's life. The Aviator is performed by Leonardo DiCaprio and directed by Martin Scorsese. Of course, this last film wasn't shot in the 1930s, but in 2004. On the other hand, we find horror films. In this decade, Universal Studios assembled several iconic monsters in motion picture history, including Dracula, The Mummy, The Invisible Man, The Wolfman, and Frankenstein. This last one was based on Mary Shelley's classic Gothic novel. Hey, in Netflix, you can find a great biopic about this prominent writer. Outside the US, this was the decade of Fritz Lang's M, Alfred Hitchcock's The 39 Steps, and Luis Buñuel's The Age of Gold. Yet, we should thank the 1930s for leaving us one of the most famous lines. My dear, I don't give a damn. Can you recognize it? As for visual art, social realism and surrealism became relevant movements during the Great Depression. The former refers to the work produced by painters that aims to draw attention to the real socio-political conditions of the working class as a means to critique the power structures behind these conditions. The latter proposed that the Enlightenment, the influential 17th and 18th century intellectual movement, had to press the superior qualities of the rational and conscious mind. Surrealism's goal was to liberate thoughts, language, and human experience from the oppressive boundaries of rationalism. Even though this moment officially began with the Dadaist writer Andrés Breton's 1924 Surrealist Manifesto, throughout the 1930s, Surrealists became more visible to the public at large. Paris was the cradle of this art. An amazing film about this topic is Midnight in Paris by Woody Allen, in which it's possible to see a large number of artists like Buñuel, Man Ray, Dalí, who actually lived in Paris during the 20s and contributed to the Surrealism movement. Among the icons of Surrealism, we find names as Miró, Dalí, René Magritte, Mark Ernst, and also Frida Kahlo, even though she rejected the designation given by Breton when traveled to her house in Mexico to meet Trotsky. To appreciate the 1930s in art would require a much longer piece. However, hope you had enjoyed this presentation and understand that despite the terrible years that population had to undergo due of the economical, political and war consequences, this population created one of the most magnificent and exquisite art of the century.